All right, well, here's my finished sketch of the work of The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Um, this video will kind of walk you through the steps to go from, just a plain sheet of paper, what paper to choose, your printed out drawing, and then your final ready to be painted on or ready to be colored on impressionist image sketch and what the steps are to do that. All right, artists. Well, welcome today to our pre-recorded video. This is my first setup as far as the project we're going to be doing today. The tool that I'm going to be using is a pencil. Shock, surprise. And I have some lightweight paper. This is just like copy paper from your printer. And I have some heavier weight it's almost like watercolor paper, but it's not quite that heavy. But you can just sort of, when you lift it up, you can just tell this one has a little more resistance to it. It's a little thicker, it has a little texture. So this is the one I'm going to be using for my final drawing. This is just to show you what not to use. It will probably not work very well for your final project to look very done if you use this, but I'm going to keep this on the table to use as sort of a backer so I don't get anything on my work surface here. And then I have my image of my artwork. And so this is the Vincent van Gogh Starry Night, just like I have in my instructions. I printed it off from my computer. And I just have a grayscale printer, so that's just fine. So the first thing you're going to want to do when you want to make a sketch that's a copy of an image is to decide, okay, should your paper be up and down in portrait mode or side to side in landscape mode? What makes the most sense for your image? And take a look at your proportions. The Starry Night here is not a rectangle with the same proportions as my paper. I actually need to cut this a little bit so that it's more of a squished rectangle. So I'm actually going to go and cut a couple of inches off my paper before I do the next step. There, I've made my paper now be a little more matching of the size that the Starry Night is, proportion-wise. It's still bigger than this drawing, but that's okay. I want that. I want to make sure that I'm learning how to draw things bigger than they are necessarily sitting in front of me so I can use my paper well. So the next step you'll want to do is you'll want to take your drawing, the printout that you have, and we're going to make some guidelines for us to use. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to fold the paper in quarters. So I'm going to fold once down the middle this way and once across this way. And we're just going to get a fold through the middle of our picture. I'm going to do that and come back. All right, so I folded my paper just in half and in half, and now I have these lines that are there but not there. Like you can see them when the light is reflected on the paper, and you can kind of see in the black areas where they've sort of been folded away, but it's not disrupting my image. So that's what I want. That's good. Now I need to make lines on my drawing paper so that I can put those light lines and I can kind of create a grid for myself so I can draw things in the right proportion, the right size in relation to what they should be. So to do that, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line it up with the edge of the paper and I'm going to see how big it is. So my paper is about 10 inches long. Your paper might be a little bit bigger, might be a little bit smaller, but whatever it is, take that length and divide it by 2. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. I find the 5 on my ruler, I look for the long tick mark, and I'm just going to make a little line on my paper just above the long line next to the 5. And I'm going to do that 2 times. That way I can get a nice straight line. So again, I'm going to line my ruler. Now notice that my ruler has a line for 0. I'm not lining it up with the edge of the ruler. I'm looking for that 0 line. You might be using one that has the edge of the ruler, but everyone's a little bit different. So again, so I'm looking for the 5. Oh, my ruler moved a little bit. There we go. So I drew my little light tick mark. Now I'm not pressing hard. I'm not trying to make a dent in the paper. So those 2 tick marks there. And I'm going to repeat again going this way. So I'm going to just move my paper so it's a little easier for me to use. So again, line up my ruler. 9. So half of 9 this time is 4.5. So I'm going to go between 4 and 5 and look for that long line going up through the middle. make a little tick mark. And I'll show you why we have to do 2 sets. Why it's really important that you do 2 sets when doing this, rather than just having one and trying to guess and make it straight. If I were to only have 1 tick mark and I were to lay my ruler across the paper like this, I could go, right about there. That looks pretty straight. And then I draw that line. Well, then it wouldn't actually be straight, and this corner would be smaller than this corner. So I want to make sure I've got the 2 lines, and I can line it up along there. And I'm going to draw that line. Now I have to use my second hand to support the ruler so that it doesn't wiggle on me. So I'm going to cut away and come back. All right, so I've drawn my quarters here. And now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be drawing the things in each of the quarters of my original artwork in my section of my painting. So this quarter I would draw here. This quarter I would draw here. It's like you're drawing a little mini painting inside the painting, okay? It's just a way of breaking down like all this information that you're seeing and making sure that it goes kind of in the right spot. So I'm going to start with like the biggest, most obvious feature of my painting, which is the big tree that sits right here, because that's going to be really obvious if I draw it in the wrong spot. Say I were to draw it right in the middle of my picture. When I'm all done, it's going to be really obvious that I didn't take a good look at what I was seeing in the overall picture before I started. So one thing you really want to do is you want to look at what are those really big main features. And so for me, it's probably the tree, the hills here, the moon, and some of the swirly information and the stars. Because the picture is called Starry Night, so we know that it's mostly about the stars. So what I want to do is I want to start by looking at where does this tree hit in this half of the painting. Because so I know for sure I'm only going to be working in this half over here. And I see that the tree comes in from the edge a little bit and is not as far as the center. So it's off center. Like this might be the whole center of that half. So I'm actually going to do a little tick mark for myself. Okay, I know that that's where the tree is going to end. And then going this way, it's a little bit, maybe right there. Okay, so I'm looking at how big that is. And then I notice that the tree goes almost to the top of the picture, but not quite. And it's pretty much straight up from where it was. So I'm going to look at that and I'm going to go, okay, not up quite to the top, but that's where my tree is going to end. And I notice that this part is off center from the base. This bottom part of the bush almost touches that center line. So I'm going to make a little drawing there. My drawing doesn't look like a drawing yet, but I'm setting myself up so that when I start drawing, I can get things approximately the right sizes. Notice this comes down from there a little bit, so approximately here I'll have some of those swirly, branchy information. Okay, comes down, and there's another one of these little swirly things. Okay, so I'm starting to get in some of that information. The fact that this is not just straight up and down, but it's kind of swirly or wiggly is something that is kind of important to notice. And that's a feature of this style, Van Gogh style. It doesn't have to be totally locked in at this point. Notice that I'm kind of over sketching, but you'll notice that the lines that I'm drawing are really super light, so that if I needed to, I could take my eraser and erase without leaving marks or dents on my paper. So I'm holding my pencil kind of further back, and I'm using a little bit of the side of the pencil in order to draw with, rather than just the fine tip. Everybody has their own style, so as long as you're not pressing hard, you'll probably be fine. The next thing I want to do is I want to lay out the next really big feature is the top of the hillside. So I notice that it comes down a little bit. It's approximately here. And then there's like one big hump and a second hump coming up from there. And that's about halfway. I want that hump to be a little bit smoother. There we go. And then almost touching, there's like a thing over here. This shape's a little funny, so I'm going to look at that. And then coming down. So this is the idea of what you're going to do to lay out these big features of your image. So start with the big things and work your way through. For this step of the project, you don't want to start adding shading or anything other than just kind of those outlines, because we want to be able to add the color that we see next week. So, this has to start a little lower. Oops. So look, I have to do some erasing there to clean that up. We'll cut back when I'm all done with my sketch. This should take the sketching process from start to end should take you like 35, 45, maybe an hour, 35, 45 minutes, or maybe an hour, depending on how much practice you've already had with sketching. If you haven't done a lot of drawing and sketching before, you may need to do it and then start again. Maybe you're not very good at pressing lightly and you have to make some mistakes. You know, it's okay if that happens. This whole week is just about getting this sketch to the point where we're ready to start adding color next week. And that's all you have to do. So hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of where we're starting. All right, I'm to the point where I'm pretty happy with my sketch. Notice the fact that, you know, I've got the basic outlines and shapes, but I'm not starting to fill in all that little line information. Okay, I'm not interested right now in trying to create values or capturing all the line work, all the little whatevers. I'm just looking that I'm capturing the big major shapes, okay? But I'm leaving it fairly simple, fairly plain. This is kind of where we want to be. The last step that you'll need to do is you'll need to erase your T marks. We call these the T marks in your picture because they're not part of your final. Excuse me. And so you'll need to erase those, and you'll need to just sort of make sure that you keep your drawing someplace safe so that it's ready for us to start adding color work to it next week in an impressionist style.